What's up, guys? Welcome to episode 16 of the Firefighters Podcast. This week, joining us, I have retired FDNY Lieutenant Rob Brown, a friend of mine, and he's here to talk to us about what he started doing on the side, quote unquote, but something that's very important, something that's pertinent now with everything going on in the fire service. We all know cancer is the number one killer, but heart disease is right behind it. So let me bring in Rob. He's going to tell you what he does, and we'll go from there. What's up, Rob?
How are you? How's everything, Robbie?
All right.
Good to be with you, man.
Yeah, good to have you. So you just retired. You're joining us from an undisclosed location on the West Coast. Enjoying your time, so we appreciate it. And so you were lieutenant in SOC, right?
Yes. Yep.
I won't tell anybody. But I like to talk about all the different people we have that make up the fire service, right? Because we're all from everywhere, all types of people, all different trades. And you in particular, very unique. You were a physician's assistant, but you started New York Firefighters Heart and Lung in 2002, so right after 9/11. So tell us a little bit about that and what you guys do.
So the Heart and Lung Institute is something that I founded right after 9/11. We had, prior to 9/11 in 2001, we had over 7 firefighters that had died from cardiovascular related deaths, including, I believe, 6 that were heart attacks. And so that year, we lost over 350 firefighters, in the year of 2001. What one of the things is we had young men, otherwise healthy, that may or may not have been seeing a doctor regularly or some sort of healthcare practitioner. And what we ask firefighters to do each and every day when they respond to fires is we expect them to put on 100 pounds of equipment and operate like professional athletes with little or no, training or warning, 0 to 60. And that has a tremendous impact on our overall health, especially the strain that it puts on the cardiovascular system. So whereas somebody that might have a small or a mild or moderate defect in their cardiovascular system, whether it's their heart or their arteries, that sits behind a desk or maybe does something that's lightly physical, that might not be detrimental to their health and doing their profession. But when you have moderate blockages in the heart, that may not cause a tremendous blockage where you have a heart attack, but where you can rupture off a piece of plaque when you're performing at the highest levels that you need to when you're firefighting. And that
so is that like, sorry to cut you off, but so like that 3 a.m. run when you're at rest, right? And then 2 minutes later, you're 100 pounds,
0 to 60,
hood up. So obviously your heart rate goes up. So does that like create pressure on those arteries and like shoots the plaque off because it's like a sudden rush of pressure?
So yeah, exactly, Rob.
Okay.
Basically, the way that I describe it, everything I do is non-scientific when I talk to firefighters. That's the best way to approach it. Not only that, it was the only way I could pass PA school was to equate everything back to the fire service, so I can remember everything. And just to your point there of what kind of strain is in the cardiovascular system, what I do is talk about a river, right? And you have a mountain river that's a babbling brook, and you look at it and the water's going down nice and easy. There's no increased velocity, but you see on the side of the river, it looks like something dug up the side of the river, whether it's some rocks that pulled off or maybe some dirt, some sort of erosion. And then maybe once in a while you're driving down that river, you see a massive tree that came off the side and now is obstructing the flow of the water. So think of that, and now think of what a firefighter does. Like you said, at 3 a.m., we're resting heart rates at 60 beats per minute. We get that beep bop goes off, first do phone alarm, fire, reports of people trapped. Before you even get on that rig, your heartbeat is starting to pound pretty tight. So you know that you're building up this fight or flight sympathetic response. That is what you need in order to have the courage to do the things that we have to do as firefighters, right? To put our lives, put our families' lives on the line each and every day in order to save other people's lives. But when we do that, there's also, for every action, there's a reaction. And when you elevate the sympathetic response to get ready for this battle that we're about to go into, it also has some detrimental side effects or consequences of it. And one of them is that it increases the velocity inside the arteries tremendously, to those levels of where you'd see you have a tremendous snowstorm, and then you see it rains, and now you have the snow melt, the rain, and now that river starts to rise, and the river starts to run faster, and what it starts to, the velocity of the water increases, and now some rocks on the side of the river are starting to pull loose. Well, that could be the plaque in your arteries. That might only be a 30 or 40% blockage that's there, which has plenty of room for blood to flow around it. But if it rips off and floats down to another area that could be a 30 or 40% blockage, well, that can end up causing a severe blockage, causing decreased blood flow past there, which means that heart muscle is going to die because it's not getting oxygen, it's not getting nutrients, and everything it needs to sustain to viable muscle. And that's when you would suffer a heart attack.
So could that be, I would assume that would be cumulative too then, right? So not
Right.
just that one run at 3 a.m., but the 10 you might have that night, and every time your heart gets going and calms down, like, is it loosening up the plaque maybe? Like, kind of like
It can be what
analogy?
happens when, what you're talking about is, like erratic sleep patterns, or
Right.
people that might suffer from something similar to like sleep apnea or the
Mhm.
equivalent of sleep apnea. And what that does is it acts on the body a little bit differently, and it causes stress to the body, which releases cortisol. And cortisol helps the body, but at high levels or chronic levels can cause inflammation to build up in the body, and it attacks weaknesses in the body. So, some people that have very stressed out, or something's going on in their life, along with maybe suffering from an injury. Well, that injury, because of decreased sleep, the increased cortisol, increased inflammation, it's attacking that weakness in the body. And we'll talk about COVID in a little bit, and my belief on how that kind of wreaks havoc on the body. But inflammation is not our friend. And I think part of what we have to do as firefighters, and the stress that we go under, and it's bursts of operations. It's not sustained operations for days and days. It's the highest intensity workout that you've ever had in your life, for 20 or 30 minutes. Probably one of the reasons why firefighters that we see tend to gravitate towards playing ice hockey, because ice hockey, you work real hard for a minute and 20 seconds, and you come off, take a break for a minute and 30 seconds, and you can go back and do it again.
Most of us, it's 30 to 40 seconds, but guys like you never come off the ice.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Good point. Unless it's in the defensive zone.
Right. But so if you guys don't know, Rob and I played together on the FDNY hockey team for a few years there.
Yep.
Rob's a
Good
good hockey
times.
player. Played at Stony Brook University, right?
Yep. Alumnus of the honorary member of the SIGs for a couple of seasons. Yeah.
Yeah, we gave you a robe for a little
I
bit.
got a robe,
there.
and you
Yeah,
changed my shirt.
right.
Yeah.
But
Good times. Good times.
but back to the heart. What about those big firehouse meals? Like, because there is a balance, right? Because as we know, every meal could be your last, and I think
Sure.
some firefighters eat that way. But in all seriousness, so it's got to have an effect when
Sure.
you're full of ravioli or something, and then the tones go off.
Yeah. So when exactly. So for that purpose, right after the meal, 25% of your blood flow can get, normally that wouldn't go into the gastrointestinal area, now is processing this food. So it takes away resources from what you would use to increase the cardiac load on your heart, and to maybe work on shooting more oxygen and nutrients to the muscles that are working, during that operation. So it's probably not the best thing. Obviously, small meals are much better. More of it is long-term diet and abuse, whether it's big meals, big fatty meals, late meals. They say we're supposed to eat a meal the size of your fist, maybe 4, 5, or 6 times a day, depending on how active you are. I mean, there's a diet for everybody, right? But ultimately, the things that we put into our body usually don't help, prevent heart disease. They probably would contribute to it more often than not. But I would say that, when I got on the fire department in 1996, and then my father in the 60s before that, everything was fried food. You had, massive fryers inside every firehouse kitchen. And, now we're eating a little bit more salads. I think guys are more aware. Guys understand, that not only do we need to stay healthy, for, to be optimal as a firefighter, but, long-term survivability. My line as a retiree is my job is to stay alive.
Right. I mean, but the average age isn't that high after you retire, right? The average length of time, it's pretty.
I think if you calculate in, people that die, while they're in service, and probably averages out to not great. Whoops. Oh, we lost it. Hold on 1 second.
Hold on. Yeah, we don't want to lose your hair. We need the flowing locks here. There we go.
There we go. Sorry. I was getting a phone call. We had almost 2 feet of fresh powder today. So
sorry.
A lot of people are jealous of not being here. It's been dry in Lake Tahoe for about a month and a half. So everybody's very happy, including me. I think it's important. Diet is very important. Guys are aware of it. One of the things that I talk about, dealing with firefighters is, we're a very reactionary people. We're used to dealing with people's worst days, right? Think of the worst possible thing that could happen to you in your life, and you don't have an answer to it. You call the fire department, and then we show up in a big red truck, and we come in, we assess the situation, and we mitigate it to the point where it's not a life-threatening situation anymore. And we do that day in and day out. We're programmed to do that. And in order to do that job and put your life on the line and to risk yourself, it takes a lot, but you have to be sort of invincible, right? Because guys are going to die even if we do everything right. It's just the way it is. We don't have to look too far to see firefighter Gerhard from 134 truck in Queens. How close this could be a 34-year-old, otherwise healthy firefighter. And they're still looking for answers to why it happened. And I'm curious to see, what was the ultimate cause of his death. But, it's one that we see in the news often, the firefighter that goes and operates at a fire for a good extended period of time. And, when we look back at the 2001 era before 9/11, a lot of those deaths either happened in the home 24 hours after they finished their shift, much like firefighter Gerhard from Ladder 134 recently. There was another lieutenant that just passed away from a heart attack that was covering in Division 1. He was originally from Engine 301, and he passed away just recently from a heart attack.
Can you tell us a little bit, because that seems to happen a lot, like, guys will die a day or two later, why does, like, what happens in the body to cause that to happen so much further after the event? And is there anything you could do to prevent it?
Well, I think the most important thing is when you're operating at a fire is to make sure that you're getting checked out right after it. And the department is, in New York City, is implementing different programs to get guys to get decontaminated quickly. Rehab has gotten slightly better. And then at multiple alarms, they have EMTs and paramedics that will monitor their blood oxygen levels and take blood pressures and vitals as more of a voluntary and informational gathering thing. But, if a guy is jammed up, I think, it's a responsibility for each and every guy that's working with each other on that tour to watch out for each other. And, we have a motto in the fire service is leave no man behind. Well, I would say, that doesn't just end on the fire ground. And I think that we have to make sure that after the fire, that guys are looking out for each other, making sure that if somebody doesn't look right, somebody's telling somebody or saying something either to the officer or the senior firefighter working that tour that, hey, Billy doesn't look right. Maybe we should get him checked out. Or, many departments around the country, there's a paramedic on duty every day. In New York City, they could just call a bus over to have them do a 12-lead EKG. And if anything, have somebody talk the guy into getting checked out. And that's what it's about, is getting checked out. How many guys come in that otherwise feel healthy, come into the office, and after a second or third visit, we're putting a stent in their heart, or for some of the older retirees, and some active guys, we're putting valves in, and these people otherwise didn't know that they had an issue. So it's great that especially in the New York area, tri-state area, we have plenty of access to care when it comes to this, and I think it's important for the viewers that are out of the New York metropolitan area, if they have a small department, is to team up with a doctor or a PA or a nurse practitioner that might have a family member on the fire department that has an interest in taking care of firefighters' health, and just starting by seeing one patient and making a difference each and every day. And I started with one patient, and I've seen well over 7,500 firefighters in the 20 years, individual patients, and many of them still follow today.
Right. And you guys catch things other than heart disease too, right? I mean, there's a lot
Correct.
of skin cancer now,
Yep.
in the
Yep.
9/11 community, especially.
Yep.
And I think that ties into, I did an episode last year about the PFAS chemicals in bunker gear,
Mhm.
causing cancer,
Mhm.
which I think also has to have adverse effects on your heart, right? If you have
Oh yeah.
DNA
Yeah.
changing chemicals in your body. But I think maybe part of what you were saying is we need to change the stigma about decon and showering. Certainly
Correct.
after every fire, you should be taking a shower, right?
Correct.
I mean, you
Yep.
can't shower after every run, but keep your hood clean and all that. I think that's, I
Yeah.
don't know if that's
Swap your hood
changing.
out.
Yeah.
Swap your hood out, and we need to, make a push to retrain probies in how they dress for runs. Firefighters, we do a lot of emergencies that don't require structural firefighting gear.
Right.
And when we don't have a structural firefighting run, that gear shouldn't be on that firefighter. One thing you have to remember is one of the things we find the most, besides skin cancer in the office by sending guys out for full body checks, is thyroids. And we find a lot of nodules in young men. And this thyroid cancer is predominantly a female disease in the 6th and 7th decade of life. I've found cancer in a 35-year-old firefighter of the thyroid, and many of them are in their 40s and early 50s. That require either removal of the thyroid or a partial removal of the thyroid in order to get rid of it. It's a very
Sure.
treatable cancer. It's probably we used to say prostate cancer was the one you wanted to get if you had to pick one. This probably would be a slightly easier to deal with if caught early than prostate cancer. So it's finding it, it's monitoring the area. Nodules can come and go. We've had nodules that stay the same for years, and then we have guys that it grew to the point where it needed a biopsy within 9 months of the first time finding it. So
Yeah.
each case is different, but the most important thing is for guys to get screened, and that's one of the tests that we do. When guys come in to get their annual, or young guys come in every 3 or 4 years, and it's just to keep an eye on you and to make sure that it gives you the best chance not to have an issue on the fire ground. And at the end of the day, when you're in the system and you have me, like I always say, part of my job when guys come into the office is for me to, keep them honest, right? And it's not just, doing a stress test or having an echocardiogram. It's making sure that they're getting their prostate checked, not just with the PSA, but they get the digital rectal exam. that they're getting their colonoscopy and their endoscopy and they're up to date, and that they're just making sure that any of the family history that they have, that they're watching that closely and monitoring it, the best they can. It's like considered a red flag, or
Right.
in the fire service, it's smoke in the exposure, so we
Well,
have to send a team to check it out.
I think that's why, I mean, this isn't the right way to put it, but I think that's why you're successful at finding these things, is because you get the guys to be honest. Like if you go to if you're an active firefighter and you go to the medical office, you're not 100% honest all the time, because
Correct.
most of
Correct.
you just want to go back to work, right? Or you don't want it to lead to retire, whatever. So you're not 100% honest. A lot of times you just want to get out of there. Like if you're
Right,
yearly
right.
medical, you don't want to sit there answering questions all day. So I think,
Well,
to your
most
credit,
importantly,
is to get the guys
most
to,
importantly, they don't want to get pulled offline,
right. That's what,
right?
exactly.
So like they don't want to, they don't want these guys saying you're not going to be a full duty firefighter, you can't ride the fire truck anymore. And I think that's why guys will be a little more honest with like me,
right.
because I'm not going to do that. And one of the things I always say to guys is if we find something that's life threatening, we'll work together to time it right, so that the number one, that you're safe, and number two, that you don't do anything that could hurt you when it comes to the department. So
Right. And you would tell
know,
them, I mean, I was told by an outside doctor that it was time to retire. I withheld that information. I was one of those guys, but
yep,
he got to me and was like, what are you doing? And
right,
that gave me the kick in the ass I needed to tell them the
yeah,
truth, I guess. But I think it's important that those guys, because I know a lot of them, see somebody,
hmm
these guys who, I know it's probably harder to get away with now, but would skip their medicals for years,
correct, yeah.
find a way, you know how it is. You can find
They
like
haven't had a medical in 3 years.
that.
During the pandemic,
Right.
right? During a pandemic, and I understand how the fire department has to work, but during a pandemic, right? Since the beginning of this pandemic, I said the number one risk stratification is your age with the comes to, and number two is medical problems.
Yeah.
So if we're closing down primary care doctors' offices so that healthy people can't get their physicals and blood work, we're making the pandemic worse, right? So
And you're
in the
under
fire
intense
department,
stress. So all those issues are going to be accelerated because
correct,
of all the trauma we're all going through.
correct, and that's one of the things that that public health, in my opinion, listen, I'm nobody. I put something out there that there's problem. The vaccine is not without risk, right? I didn't say the vaccine is bad and you shouldn't take the vaccine, but I said the medical community should be talking about how the vaccine is not without risk, and that this is, once you knew what you knew before they even put anything into place, that the shot does not stop transmission or from somebody getting the illness itself, right? Because that's kind of the message that they put out there, even though that's not what the science was, to get people to get a vaccine, even though many of them didn't need it. And life is about risk, and we know
Sure.
risk assessment better than anybody else. And if you want the vaccine, you get the vaccine. Good for you. You want the flu shot, you get the flu shot. And someone said, "Oh, what kind of degree do you have that you got better than Dr. Fauci? You know better than him." I said, "Well, 99% of my patient population is vaccinated. So does that mean Dr. Fauci's a bad doctor because he's America's doctor and only 61% of the population is vaccinated?" People
Right.
don't want the vaccine, and it's not stopping the spread of this virus.
Right.
And if you want the vaccine, you get the vaccine. If you need the vaccine, you get the vaccine. It's but it should be an individual conversation with your doctor. Somebody not getting the vaccine is not going to end civilization because they're going to kill everybody. It only took in December for everybody to see that regardless of vaccination status, you got Omicron, right?
Right.
You look. Somebody says, "Well, you're 6 times more likely to get COVID-19 if you're unvaccinated still. And I said, well, all right. So my neighbor who's is vaccinated got it twice. So that means my unvaccinated neighbor should have had this thing 12 times, but he didn't get it once yet.
Right.
You know, statistics can be manipulated any way you want. You open up the window, you look outside, and you see what's going on. And if you need the shot, you get the shot.
Right.
I
think
that's what these mandates are terrible.
But I think what you said is true. It should be a conversation with your doctor. The people I take issue with are the ones who make claims on either side without discussing it with a doctor, or because there are risks to every vaccine, and my family history, so I'm always asking those questions. And for me, I determined that the risk was worth it for me because the odds.
Understood. Yeah.
But a random stranger doesn't know that your personal medical history, or if you're prone to blood clots or whatever, heart disease, whatever, all these other issues, inflamed heart. But anyway, I think everyone's had those discussions by now. But the reason I wanted you have you on particularly to talk about this is because of what's happening in the fire service in regards to heart attacks. We were talking before we started. You said there's 6 now firefighters that have died in the last few months.
I think they talk about 6 that are young, unexpected. One guy was a little older, but
this is all FDNY, right?
I think a couple of them 2 might have been retired, and 4 active guys. It might have been 5 active total, but I'm not 100% sure of the duty status of one of the guys. But so it's just, there's a lot of questions. And I think, and I've had arguments with physicians and, PAs and, people. And again, I enjoy the conversations. It's not that I don't, it's just that, it's again, the vaccine is not without risk, and some people are going to have problems. Most of them are going to be very mild. Most of them are going to be, short term, but there's going to be people that have some sort of long term or triggers. I've had women that come in that, we're just about to go into menopause or start menopause, and we're dealing with it. And then, almost had a super surge of menopause, the process unfolding, and everybody's discounting it. And the only thing that she ever had was the vaccine. She didn't feel this way before it. And they say it's in your head, and I think that that's wrong for the medical community. One of the things in the fire service that that killed me when I was an officer, young officer, is guys would say, I'd say, what'd you do on that list? Well, I did this, and this. So, well, it's not really what you're supposed to do, right? He goes, well, that's what we do. I was like, whoa, who's we? And why do you do it? And that to me is, it's not, that's just what you do. And many of the conversations that I had with smart people that are much smarter than me in the healthcare world, just said, just get the vaccine. And to me, that means that it's almost like a lazy answer. And it makes me like more suspicious of groupthink, right? What brought down the Space Shuttle Challenger? One guy was saying, listen, it's not been tested under this degree. We dropped below that. We should have stood the launch. And they rode that guy. And everybody said, no, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. No, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Nothing's going to happen. Boom. Okay, all right, we'll go with it. Even though he didn't want to, he went with it. It took off and it blew up. And that part that he was concerned about failed. And groupthink is a dangerous thing. And when that happens on the policy level or political level, it can be a big problem. And you're seeing that where 23 states run by Republicans have no mandates and encourage people to get the shots and been wide open, and they're doing just as good as the states that, if not better than the states that had restrictions, stay-at-home orders, mandates. De Blasio put in a mandate on December 22nd, vaccine mandate, indoor dining, vaccine mask mandate. At midnight, he put it into place. The next day, it was the highest level of positivity rate in New York City history throughout the entire pandemic. and didn't go below that level until like the beginning of February. What does that tell you? The science tells you that it doesn't work, right? And the mandates, you got people that are losing their jobs over some BS politics, right? This has nothing to do with science. And it's
Well,
sad.
it's for me, it's like, I'm not a doctor, but it's been hard for me to see any sort of clarity from the beginning. There's been mixed messages and don't wear a
Mixed
mask, wear a
messages.
mask.
Correct.
You know, crowds are bad if you're from one political party, but they're okay if
Right.
you're from another. Like, I didn't understand. I don't
Right.
get it.
New York in the beginning of the pandemic, this is the best. New York had a policy that you didn't have to be quarantined for 7 days if you were traveling to a state that touches New York. So if you drove from New York into New Jersey, Pennsylvania, back into New York, Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and then back to New York, you didn't have to quarantine. But if you stopped for a lobster roll in Rhode Island, you had to sit in your house for 7 days, right? Where's the science in that? There's not, they made up these rules. That guy
they're still doing it with the hockey game. We're still seeing it now, but they told us that if you lived in the 5 boroughs, in order to play in the game, you had to be vaccinated or have at least one shot. But if you lived in Long Island, you could just play with no proof of that. So how is this about safety?
Yeah. It has nothing to do with that. I
think that was where I was officially like, that was it for me.
It's again, in the beginning when we didn't know, and we didn't have the information, it was one thing. Once you started the information, and they didn't change, they didn't adapt to the information coming in. It was wrong. And
that was de Blasio though. So that's why
sure.
I took all that with a grain of salt, because he was always, twisting it. He was right. He always seemed to be.
Let's call it like it is. The guy ate pizza with a fork and knife. Right.
Exactly. And he wears dress shirts over his basketball jerseys.
Classic.
Right. I could do a whole season on that guy, but but that's why I figured at least when he left, all that nonsense would go away, but it didn't. Adams is still holding the same policies for like Kyrie Irving can't play, but the visiting players can play. Like, it doesn't make sense.
It's all unwinding now, and it has to happen slow. They got to come up with some sort of numbers that say no, we did it because of this.
South Park just did an episode on it, so that means it's happening.
Yeah.
They just did this they covered the whole thing.
It without a doubt. And again, it's not. The voice of the people is just not being covered, right? It's not that the majority is silent. It's that the media is not covering the majority who's out there telling Justin Trudeau enough is enough. You know what I mean? And what does the guy do? Doubles down on it. He hires a tow truck company to come and remove the trucks, and those guys stop there and they become part of the convoy. They don't tow anybody.
It's stark when you watch an NHL game and you see the empty arenas. As I'm sitting in Madison Square Garden,
with making out with the guy next to you,
leaking into the hallway.
Yeah. And what's
and the same
in
players,
New York? Nothing. Right. But what's happening in New York to people in the stands? Nothing. They're fine. They're healthy. Everything's fine. And a few of them might get sick and then they stay home. So some girl goes, how could you live with yourself if you killed your grandmother? I go, well, let me ask you something. If I'm triple vaccinated and I wear 2 masks and I kill my grandmother, am I a bad person? I mean, if you're sick, you stay away from your grandmother. What do we lose common sense, right? If you're sick, the big fear was, and how they instilled the fear was that they said 3 to 7 days before you're sick, you might spread this thing. So you didn't know if you could spread it. And, then they found out it's more like 3 days. It's just like the common cold. It's the same thing. It's just.
I also think a lot of people have been using common sense, and if you knew you were going to
Yes,
see your parents or whatever, you stayed home
got
for a week
tested. Right,
first, you got tested. I think
right,
people are capable of doing that, most of us. And
sure,
and the people who aren't are never going to do it unless you put them in prison. Like
right.
right? Like you
Well,
can't.
here's a great way to illustrate it. Over the last 2+ years, right, 26 to 27 months of COVID-19 in New York State, under the age of 21, 34 people died of COVID-19 in 28 months, right? 34 people, 12 of them were terminally ill with cancer, right? So you have 34 people, so technically 22 and 27 months, right? Died in that same time frame, that same age group population, right? 3,968 people died from all-cause trauma, car accidents, overdose, stabbing, shootings, bicycle accidents. That same population. So they were targeting, right, this group to get them vaccinated because they were going to die if they didn't get vaccinated. When they only lost 34 kids in 2 years, right? When you look at statistics of, you don't do 34, you do 26, 27, 17 over in a year, right? In 12
Right.
months out of millions of kids in New York State. You know, the medical community suffered like the first responder community suffered after 9/11. And what we suffered from was something called post-traumatic stress disorder. And many people that suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, many individuals, professionals, many organizations, because they're run by individuals that are suffering from this, and many policymakers, because we never saw so much death in such a short period of time with so much fear instilled throughout the population that they became risk averse. And that one death was too many. And how could you try and kill your grandmother when that's not what's happening, right? It was just built upon this fear that everybody was going to die. And when they were making policies or putting in places to mandate, they wanted to do something, even though probably doing nothing was the right thing and watching it was the right thing. And the same thing happens on the fire ground with the fire department. You go to a fire and there's a fire in the rear of a tenement, and you pull up and there's fire blowing out the rear. They got one line stretched out, getting into operation. The truck companies are searching. They go, the second two companies are moving to the floors above. They got a line going to the floor above. And one of the outside vent people or somebody operating at the fire in the front of the building takes the bay window in the front of the building. And not just takes the bay window in the front of the building, but takes the bay window in the front of the building and walks into the explosion, right? What did that guy do? He just caused that fire to go from the rear, right, contained with one line about to operate, to nice heavy smoke pushing out, then fire pushing out. Now we're dealing with the second alarm. The second two companies are bailing out of the floors above because they don't have water. The fire's wrapping around these people, all because somebody wanted to do something for the sake of doing something, even though it wasn't done for an objective, like
So
searching through the window for life or coordinating, the vent with the line pushing towards them to alleviate the heat and smoke.
so
And
what
that,
you think is that when you're saying when this first came in February of 2020, right? That's when
yep.
we first started seeing it here. You think we shouldn't have had any government reaction, or they should have
Well,
put more thought into it, or like
no, I
I'm
think
trying
what
to
they
figure out
did
what
was
you.
the right thing. I think,
Okay.
getting vaccinations for the vulnerable people. I think what they, uh, when they went for the booster, the FDA advisory, which is an independent advisory panel, I think of 24 medical professionals, most of them are doctors, if not all of them are doctors. And what they did was they came out and said, listen, we know the effectiveness of the shot. We think the boosters, we see that the booster can help, boost, those that are, their immune system drops their antibodies. What we're going to do is recommend anybody over the age of 65 that has any medical conditions, they get the booster shot.
Right.
And then the government stepped in and said, well, we're going to allow anybody that has a high risk job, which means you walk out your front door to go to work, that they can get the shot up to 18 years old. So which basically opened it up to the entire population.
Right.
And that's when politics overtook that, when I thought that that was always the right thing. 94% of all the deaths are over the age of 58. 75% of all the deaths, no matter what age group it was, had 4 or more chronic medical conditions. So this is a pandemic, not of the unvaccinated, although there is a spot for that. It's a pandemic of the elderly and the sick, and of that age group, the unvaccinated. It's a pandemic. Unfortunately, if a 40-year-old guy, drops from COVID-19, it's tragic, it's sad, and it shouldn't happen, but it's not a pandemic, right? Just like if a 33-year-old kid gets hit by a car and dies, we don't pull cars off the road. If every time a guy went to, in an intersection, we killed somebody, then maybe we'd probably rethink automobile transportation. But, but when you have a population that you can identify where 94% of all the deaths are over a certain age, it's pretty easy to target that group and much more easy to sell it, right? In the fire service, we always say, well, this technology, we got to use it. Back in the 60s when my dad got on, it was the mask. This mask, you can go into this fire and you could breathe this oxygen like you're sitting out in the sunny outside world. And guys said, nah, we don't need that. We're going down there. Right. And they used it when there was a basement fire. But so, there's buy-in, and what's the problem with this pandemic and why there's more deaths this year than last year from this virus is that we're not getting through to the people that are at high risk, that the vaccine actually might help them from dying from the illness. Right. Or for those unvaccinated people that don't want the vaccine, opening up access to the care for ivermectin and monoclonal antibodies, making this widely available so that when somebody starts to feel symptoms of it, they go down and get a 4-hour treatment, and it's just like they got the vaccine, right. And they don't clog up the ER. They have their own little clinic set up. So, there's a lot of other. But
I think that's been the failure from the beginning, is to actually convince the people that are high risk who need it, because I think it was a bad PR job. That, like I said earlier, correct. They just constantly contradicted themselves. They still are. Correct. And it's so people already mistrust the government, right? They always think that there's an ulterior motive behind everything they do. Sure. So when you stick it in our faces, it makes it harder. It makes it harder to listen when they're actually trying to help.
Without a doubt. No, it's the most important thing guys can do, is just, knowing their risk. I think that's the most important thing. And I think, in light of these, 6 guys passing in recent months, kind of unexplained, I think it's, just reiterates the point that, the best chance you have to not be a statistic in this is, to know your risk. And, if you decide to be unvaccinated for whatever reason, that to me, that's your choice. Just be smart about it. And if you get sick, you can't be that invincible fireman because it's going to get you killed. You got to seek treatment early. You got to get those early treatments that can make a difference. And knowing that you have it and then treating it the right way is what's going to save your life. And it's probably just as effective as the vaccine. But
is it so? What's the issue with? Are they not administering it to people? Like what? Because I've heard of this for a while now. The monoclonal antibodies have been a thing for over a year. Why?
Yeah, I probably had about a half a dozen unvaccinated patients that called me up saying they were sick, and some of them I monitored, some of them. The only places on Long Island that you could get them were at the Catholic medical centers. And so it was like St. Francis, Good Samaritan, I think St. Catherine. So there were a few places that had these monoclonal pop-ups. They weren't even in the ER. They put up tents outside the ER. So it didn't clog up the ER. People came in, they got tested. If they were positive, then they got a 4-hour infusion of monoclonal antibodies, which is basically antibodies that are created in a transfusion from somebody that survived COVID-19 right. and developed antibodies, right? So, and the other thing is acknowledging that, natural immunity is a thing, and that people that did get the virus and overcome it, they shouldn't be subject to some sort of mandate to if they don't want it, and you monitor the antibodies. We're giving you the vaccine to create antibodies to prevent you from getting a virus. So
Right.
if the person's immune system worked properly after they got it and they developed antibodies, then they're just as protective, if not more. Or it probably goes back to their age and their medical conditions on which one of those two people are going to have a bad outcome and which one of those two people are going to have a good outcome.
Right.
But it's going to take a lot of time in history. We'll have to, we'll have to show what worked and what didn't, and the politics are going to have to be removed from it, because I think that played a huge part in, the bad messaging.
Well, I think politics has always played a role in medicine, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, so I don't know, man. It's tough because I don't think a lot of people can have conversations like this where they actually just listen to people who, like, most of the things that you're saying are things that I probably would have disagreed with before we started talking.
Mhm.
But they make sense, like, I think if more people just spoke to each other like this instead of yelling about
Right.
all the fringe nonsense that gets everyone fired
Right.
up. Because I think that's probably part of why they do it, right? You said before, the media is not covering stuff like this because they're all covering this shit that gets everyone riled up at each other. And I
Right.
think,
Right.
no one wants to believe, I don't know, sometimes that life just sucks, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I think everyone wants to blame someone for, if someone died, like, sometimes, I mean,
Things happen.
right. Like me personally, I stayed in my house for the first year and a half. You know that I didn't go anywhere
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
I assessed the risk and thought that I probably shouldn't get this fucking virus.
Sure.
But but that doesn't mean I expect the rest of the world to stay in their house because they might get me sick. Like I never
Right.
thought,
Right. Right.
like, I think that's reasonable if
Healthy people can't get people sick. Right. Healthy people can't get
right. I mean,
people sick. Somebody that gets sick, they, and again, we lost that, right? We lost that. It was everybody could get anybody sick, and that's not the case. The asymptomatic spread, which again, I think history will show, is a much shorter window
is
than
it?
they made it out to be. I think it's about 3 days. The Omicron
Okay.
was about 24 to 36 hours, which is about the norm.
And
But I think when it was in the beginning, I think it was a little bit longer. Viruses, again, the way the viruses work, and again, I'm not an epidemiologist or immunologist or anything from that matter. But what I am is understanding that viruses have been around longer than any other organism.
right.
So we create this spike protein, and this thing's like gets on there, and the first time it's like it gets through to it, but it's going, hold on a second, let me just figure this thing out. But okay, boom. Next time it sees it, boom. Now 50% of it works, 50 doesn't, and then you're down to 25%. And what we're dealing with now, I think it just overcame it. And the beauty of viruses is that its job is to mutate and to become less deadly, right? So,
Right.
it wants to just kind of live throughout the world, and you to cough a little bit and land on a napkin that gives it to somebody else. And, besides a sniffle, nobody knows that this organism's living in them. And that's where it's trying to get
But
to.
isn't that what the
or else
flu is now, basically?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I think one of them is a coronavirus. This is coronavirus 2, right? COVID-2. There's a
Uh-huh.
COVID-1, which might be that. Again, I don't want to, I'm not 100% on that. I don't want to throw that out there. And,
You're not a
somebody be
doctor,
texting into your
but
show like, yeah. Who is this guy? I'm just a fireman.
right.
I stayed at a Holiday Inn last night.
Oh man, I won't tell you what happened at that Holiday Inn though. I'll save that one for your eulogy.
That was that was in Fayetteville, right? Fayetteville, North Carolina. There was an episode of Cops that broke out. Davy's kid was on the phone with his wife. He's like, "Mom, the cops are here." The guy says the guns out. The guy jumped off the balcony.
Right.
That was great. Classic.
We didn't have these fancy cameras back then, so all this
No,
no.
we would have that. Yeah,
That would have
Thank
been
God we didn't have cameras.
right.
That pool doesn't look the same. I'll tell you that. Classic.
Oh man. All right. So before I let you go, what what should guys be doing right now? You know, vaccinated, unvaccinated. Besides going to their medicals, which I'm assuming started already, right? Shouldn't they be going a little bit further than the regular
They're
population?
pushing for it now. It's being
All
pushed
right.
for now.
So shouldn't they be doing a little bit
the
more
one
than
that we
that?
have is OSHA right now.
Right.
Yes, yeah. The fire department, hopefully what they'll be able to do is, where there's concerns in New York City, they'll be able to authorize some, testing so that guys can get an echocardiogram or a stress echo of their heart. And that'll give guys enough information where, many of these things that we're talking about could be picked up on just a simple test like that. Now, I say simple, it's not a simple test, it's a fairly sophisticated test, but simple in the sense that it doesn't cause you to need to be exposed to radiation. It's just with an ultrasound and some exercise. And for every active firefighter, we should be able to get above a certain number of METs, meaning how much energy we expend on the test for a bare minimum. So like the FDNY has 12.1 METs or above 12 METs allows that firefighter to be considered full duty. So, that's one test. Getting a baseline for people, one of the things guys did right before when they were pushed into getting the vaccine, which was smart, is they came in to get an echocardiogram, a baseline. They got a stress test, they got a pulmonary test, and a blood work just to make sure that if something came up after that, they could at least, look back to see if there was any change from the baseline and what went on. Many of the side effects from not only COVID-19, but the vaccine are very minimal. And most people do just fine with both. But I think what it's going to show when we look back is that, there was really no need to vaccinate healthy people, their immune systems. They actually boosting people like that is probably not the best thing. But
well,
again,
if it didn't stop the spread of it, I guess
correct.
For me, if it would have stopped the spread, then I think it would have been a.
I think a lot more people would have gotten it.
Right.
And that was, they pushed, and then just skewing numbers when it came to the kids. Every time you got on TV, the board member, Dr. Gottlieb from Pfizer, who's making the shot, is saying, they're going, what do you think's going to happen? Well, if we just get these next 20 million people vaccinated, we're going to turn the corner in this. And every time he said that, it didn't happen. And Pfizer, this is just a little something tidbit. Pfizer just pulled their emergency application for the under 5 and under population, right? And one of the things that this board member said when he was asked on national TV about it was, well, when we assessed it, the risk wasn't necessarily there, and to push it when we were only going to get theoretically 11 to 17% of parents to inoculate those kids, we didn't think it was worth it.
Right.
So it came down to money, right? I mean, you got to follow the money and you see it. And I'm not saying that Pfizer didn't, the vaccine didn't save people's lives. I know it did. I'm not against the vaccine. I just think that the vaccine was oversold and it under-delivered. And I think people were afraid, because it was politics, to unwind it the way that it needed to when the science said it. And the Republican group did, and the Democrats didn't, and they're starting to unwind it now because the polling's showing that people are pissed off. And that's
right.
And so,
well, and it also shows that members of both parties have made a lot of money throughout this pandemic also.
Oh, without a doubt.
So it doesn't
matter.
That's what I end up talking about politics when I don't mean to on the show, but it always comes back to there's only one party. People, that's the problem. Right. People don't understand that. It's not red and blue, it's green. That's all it is.
Right. No, without a doubt, there's, a lot of people say follow the money.
Yeah.
and I'm not saying that it doesn't, listen, it all starts out. These people that are working at Pfizer, they want to make a difference. They want to save
Right.
people's lives. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's when, the numbers, and my feeling is there's certain populations for an emergency authorization. There's certain populations that were ultra low risk for complications and death from this. And they pushed that population to get vaccinated when it wasn't going to help anybody but that individual, but the risk wasn't there to make a difference in
Well,
that population.
I think especially since it didn't prevent the spread of the virus.
spread,
To get back
right.
to it, I think it.
Right.
Well, we just went in a circle, but yeah.
No, yeah, I agree with you. I came out publicly in the early, like probably April, May, right around April, it must have been. And I said, listen, if we can lead this out of this pandemic, if this shot's going to stop the spread, we can, and people are afraid, let's lead out. And the information kept pouring out in the weeks to come, like that. No, this never was designed to give this person a vaccine and not get the virus and not stop spread. But they kept marching with that same thing. You're going to kill your grandmother. You're going to kill your neighbor. And that's where I took issue with it, because they were trying to fear them into it. And they did that. And the woman in New York State admitted that they said, well, you said there was 1,000 children that were in the hospital with COVID. And she says, well, but they weren't. It was 400 kids that were being hospitalized for COVID. 600 just happened that one kid broke his finger but tested positive.
Right.
One kid was there because his toe hurt and he tested positive. But they did that, and she said, we did that to get parents to seek the protection of the vaccine and get their kids vaccinated. And that to me was, that's.
But before I really go on that note, then, but isn't there something to be said about the severity of the case you get if you're vaccinated? So, like, even if it's not going to kill you, like, wouldn't somebody who just not want to spend 3 weeks being miserable?
I can tell you what I've seen. Right?
Okay.
And what I've seen is that vaccinated people, right, that got COVID before the vaccine was available in 2000, March and April 2020.
Okay.
Those people that were vaccinated and some of them boosted had the same illness that they had then. They didn't have anything different, so, okay. And again, I'm not saying that it doesn't do that. I'm just saying that anecdotally, there are a lot of cases that it didn't make a difference. Right. And that you can actually see that.
You can't argue with that from the other side, because how do you know what would?
Correct. You don't know. That's why these guys going, if I didn't have the vaccine, I would have died. I mean, I don't know. Well, yes, if you were suffering from cancer or you were immunocompromised or you had chronic, my belief is that the vaccine status was actually number 3 in the risk stratification, and age was number 1, and medical conditions were number 2, and the vaccine status is number 3. And again, you're not seeing that, the numbers. If we've lost 1 million people or close to 1 million people now from COVID, when we hit 1 million, I'd say there's probably 100,000 of them were vaccinated that died. Not that they got a vaccine and died. They just they were vaccinated and still died. So and 350,000 of those cases happened before we even had a vaccine. So of the 600,000 cases, 18%, right? I'm just using raw numbers, 100 out of 600, 18% of the deaths since the vaccine's out are vaccinated people. And again, I don't have that exact number. Please don't quote me on that. I'm just saying there was a 4-month period that
they all stopped listening. They all stopped listening like a half hour ago. Don't worry about it. As soon as you started.
But I don't know. It's I'm a believer in it. I think it's for those people that are very high risk or moderately risk, or anybody that wants a peace of mind. Right. It feels better protected going out in public. Why not? I think the shot is still a low risk shot. I don't, it's like getting a flu shot, but
right.
It's but there's groups of people that are young and healthy that this shot is not making a difference in whether they they have a bad outcome from this or not. And that's I'm talking low risk. That doesn't mean that somebody in the 20s is not going to die from it, or I'm talking about, population compromise where many people are dying, where you have to vaccinate everybody or else we're going to lose that group of people. That group of people is the 70, 80, 90-year-old population that is sick. There's 90-year-olds that get COVID and they're fine, but they're not sick. They're just 90. But there's a 70-year-old that's got COPD and just got over a bout of lung cancer. That guy's, I don't want to be that guy. He's a super high risk for dying from this, or having a real bad case.
Well, you'll be happy
Sorry,
to know.
on the morbid note.
Well, you'll be happy to know. I'll give a shout out to my dad who listens every week. But
oh, good man.
You
Hi,
know
Mr.
his
Sarah.
you know his medical history. You'll happy to know that he got through COVID recently.
Yeah,
I hope he doesn't mind me saying. I'll have to edit it out. But he was vaccinated. But he was in the category.
I always say my parents group, my parents' age, they should get vaccinated. And
Right.
I'm not anti-vax. When my parents said they were going to Egypt 4 months ago, I called them up and said, listen, before you go, make sure you got antibodies. If you don't, get a booster, right around when you could possibly get the booster. And, so there's people that need it. And our parents, that generation, they're the ones that are at risk. So that, but our children we're at low risk, but our children are at ultra low risk. And I just think, we should wait a little more time before we start, subjecting them to something where, we don't have all the data on the long-term vaccine. And not to say that I'm sure it's still going to be very safe, but it's not without complications, and people should know what those are, and they should be readily available to the public. So that helps people make the decision on whether they want to get vaccinated or not.
Cool.
So
Absolutely. But thanks, man. The sun went down behind you. I watched it. It was beautiful.
Oh yeah.
But I appreciate you coming
on. A powder day tomorrow.
Well, I wish I could say enjoy it, but screw you.
Well, thanks for having me on, and I just hope that guys can continue to be safe out there, operate and be smart on the fire ground, and also be smart off the fire ground. Get checked out. Make sure you're taking your medical seriously. If you have a problem, treat it. If you treat it, it's not a problem. It's being managed. It's undiagnosed hypertension. It's undiagnosed heart disease that causes complications where guys either get seriously injured or die in the line of duty. And the most important piece of equipment on the fire ground is the firefighter. Everything else can't run by itself. So unless you're working at 100%, you can't operate the equipment at 100%. And that could be the demise of the entire operation. So, make sure you're checking out the most important piece of equipment on the fire ground, and make sure you're staying smart out there.
All right. That's great advice to end on. Thanks, bro. Enjoy your trip. Have a safe flight back. And
thanks,
see you again
Robbie.
soon. All right.
All right,
Later,
buddy.
man. Take care.
Talk to you soon.